All right, I got another couple in the waiting room. They're just joining. Okay.
Okay, Jennifer,
All
it's
right.
all yours.
All right. So, first of all, before we start, if you have any questions or comments, if you would put those in the chat, please, and we will get to those at the very end of our presentation. So, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the second week of our five-part series sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. Is Media Ruining America? I'm Jennifer Barber, and I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. And I would also like to introduce my colleagues, Linda Hutchinson, Kathy Mayer, Jazz Vision, and Trish Warner. And this week's topic is understanding and confronting bias. The League of Women Voters is a national, nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. Founded in 1920, its ongoing major activities include registering voters, providing voter information, boosting voter turnout, and advocating for voting rights. It comprises more than 650 state and local leagues, including the League of Women Voters of Larimer County, that work tirelessly to empower voters, defend democracy, and take action on local and state governmental matters. And for more information, there is our link to our website up there on the slide. So before we start, let's think about our homework from last session, which was to watch news from a source that was on the opposite end of the political spectrum from your regular go-to news sources. So here are some questions to consider if you were able to do that. Were you able to use the Ad Fontes media bias chart to follow stories on opposite sides of the political spectrum? Did your news story deliver the facts? And did you learn anything new? Today, we'll be discussing the following. We're going to ask these questions and more. So, are we biased? And can we accept and recognize our inherent biases and get over them? How can we recognize bias in print media, on broadcast networks, in podcasts, on social media, in subscribed newsletters, and from pundits and influencers? And what can we do about bias? Today's discussion is based primarily on chapters 14, 15, and 16 in Cindy Otis's book, True or False: A CIA Analyst's Guide to Spotting Fake News. And in our first session, we talked about the history of media disinformation or fake news and how it can distort our perceptions of the world around us. This week, we want to tackle biases that we bring to the table and learn how to recognize bias in the media. So let's do a deep dive into bias. All of us bring inherent biases to our communities of family, friends, work, interaction, social interaction, etc. And as Cindy Otis, the author of True or False, says, we all have biases. They are inescapable. The most free-thinking, woke, open-minded person in the world will still look at information through a certain lens that affects how they interpret and trust or don't trust it. So let's start with two definitions. The first one is bias, a strong inclination of the mind or a preconceived opinion about something or someone. A bias may be favorable or unfavorable. Inherent bias refers to unconscious and automatic attitudes and beliefs stemming from a person's background, culture, and experiences. Inherent biases are often learned and are rooted in variables like a person's socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, educational background, etc. So unconscious bias, bias can be conscious when a biased person is aware of their prejudices, or it can be unconscious when the biased person is unaware of their prejudices and believes their personal biases to be true. These include learned attitudes of stereotypes that exist in our subconscious and can involuntarily affect the way we think and act. And it's helpful to check our inherent biases and be aware of them. What human properties and life experience make up our inherent biases? So let's start off with a couple of easy ones. Age and gender. For example, how might your age influence your perceptions and opinions about things? How might someone who served in World War II feel about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and why? Now think of an 18-year-old. How might they think differently about it, and why? Or let's look at gender. What kind of movies do you think boys like to watch? What about girls? What are the differences and why? And this example may seem to be based on stereotypes, and there are certainly crossovers in taste in movies. But when you look at the top 10 films for men versus women, the stereotypes hold up. Inherent biases can impact dozens of perceptions, decisions, and actions in our daily lives. Many of these we'll recognize immediately, like ageism, sexism, racism. There are other more subtle biases that lurk in our subconscious, like name bias. What picture comes to mind when you hear the name Mary Catherine, Chantal Shanice? Then there's beauty bias. This refers to the tendency to favor individuals perceived as physically attractive, leading to unfair advantages, particularly in the workplace. Say you're hiring for a position and two people with comparable or even incomparable skills interview for the position. Someone who looks like Amal Clooney and one who is overweight with a bad complexion. Which do you hire? And then there is the halo effect. When we develop an overall positive impression of someone because of one of their qualities or traits. How many of us were dismayed to discover that O.J. Simpson was accused of murdering Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman? Or that Chauncey Billups was involved in an NBA betting scandal? Did we find it hard to believe? Conformity bias. When we form or change opinions or behaviors to match that of a larger group. Think church, social, and political groups. Keep in mind that in many cases, we choose the groups we belong to. But in digital media, including Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and others, algorithms push us into groups based on our engagement. Affinity bias, the tendency to favor people who share similar interests, backgrounds, and experiences. Contrast effect, making judgments based on comparisons, when judgments may change depending on what standard we're comparing something to. For example, exceeds performance standards may make someone feel good about their performance until they learn that everyone got the same rating, even low performers. There's the status quo bias, our aversion to accelerating change, which causes us to want things to remain just as they are now. Prejudice against anything new or different. Anchor bias, when we overly rely on the first piece of information we receive as the foundation of our decision-making. Authority bias, the tendency to believe authority figures and follow their instructions. The caveat here is to make sure the authority figure is credible. And you can find more inherent bias examples at the Asana website, which we are putting in the chat for you. And with so many inherent biases lurking in our subconscious minds, how do we defend against them? First, we can complete a rigorous self-assessment of the inherent biases you have. Keep them in mind as you're processing new information and relationships. Next, if we want to help bridge the political divide, we have to want to do the work, to get to the truth of things, to learn to appreciate and value people who think differently than we do, whose experiences are different from what we're experiencing. And only then can we return to a civil, productive democracy, which I think we can all agree on we would love to see. So next we're going to talk about developing cultural intelligence. An organization called Culture Plus Consulting, which is a consulting firm created to support multinational employers in developing cultural intelligence, developed a model for managing unconscious bias through 6 evidence-based strategies. First, slow down. Don't react emotionally to everything you hear and read. Be mindful and deliberate in your responses to others. Number 2, engage in perspective taking. Perspective taking is defined as the ability to understand and consider another person's thoughts, emotions, and point of view. It involves the cognitive process of recognizing and empathizing with another person's experience, which enhances social interactions and communications. Before you pass judgment, proactively imagine others' thoughts and feelings. Number 3, ask yourself if your own inherent biases are coloring your perspective. Next, embrace cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is defined as the ability to understand, adapt, and work in different cultural contexts. It encompasses an understanding of cultural norms, behaviors, and communication styles, allowing individuals to better understand folks from culturally diverse environments. And finally, seek out role models. Look for role models who exhibit these habits and learn from them. And expand your community. Seek out and build diverse friendships and networks. Now we're going to shift gears. We're going to tackle how to recognize and respond to bias in the media. So when we are confronting media bias, in our first session, we learned how some media is actually appealing to our biases to capture audiences and increase engagement. And as Musk's AI engine Grok noted, the media is contributing to the biggest current threat to Western civilization, which is societal polarization, fueled by misinformation and disinformation. As Otis says in her book, we know that our inherent biases affect the information we pay attention to. They can lead us to ignore important information or automatically accept other things because they confirm what we already believe. Biases can also cause us to fall for fake news. And as Cindy Otis notes in her book, social media takes this automatic tendency to a whole other level. We friend people who agree with us and mute, unfriend, or unfollow people we don't. And algorithms compound the problem. They track our biases and serve up content that reinforces them, And this pushes us into information silos, where we only get information that supports our views, and we never see facts or data that challenge our current perceptions. Let's look at some more definitions. Let's look at cognitive bias. This is another term for inherent bias. And it's a systematic error in thinking affecting how we process information, perceive others, and make decisions. It can lead to irrational thoughts or judgments and is often based on our perceptions, memories, or individual and societal beliefs. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out and use information that confirms one's views and expectations. In other words, cherry-picking information to validate certain points. This affects our ability to think critically and objectively, which can lead to skewed interpretations of information and overlooking information with opposing views. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort we go through when our personal views and ideas about something do not match actual facts or evidence presented to us. So, here's for a show of hands. Have you ever changed your opinion about a news event based on consistent and reliable reported facts that disagreed with your original opinion? And have you ever changed your mind about a personal bias after an experience redirected your thinking? We all have. All right, so now here are some definitions to address bias in the media. Some media bias is unintentional. Most reputable journalists, especially members of the U.S. Press Association, are trained to guard against bias. However, some journalists may inject their own biases into a news story without realizing it. This may affect what types of stories they cover and how their stories are told. Since we know how pervasive inherent biases can be, we all need to be on the lookout for unintentional bias in the media. However, sometimes less reputable journalists and news commentators practice intentional bias. When a media outlet purposefully tells a story in a certain way to influence the audience's opinion about something. And this intentional bias can approach the realm of propaganda, defined as information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view.
So you may remember the ad fondus chart from session 1. It sorts media outlets according to their biases. News channels are rated according to the credibility of their reporting on the vertical axis and their political bias to the left or right on the horizontal axis. The media outlets in the center at the top above that dotted green line may reflect some unintentional bias, but they generally strive to deliver fair and balanced reporting. They try to comply with the journalist's code of ethics and root out unintentional bias when they can. Examples they have here are the Wall Street Journal, BNO News, USA Facts, and NPR News. The media outlets in the bottom left and right corners are trying to persuade you to accept a particular point of view. In the worst case, they spread and reinforce extreme propaganda. Some examples on the far left include the Tony Michaels Show podcast, the Jimmy Dore Show, Wonkat, and on the right are Louder, Crowder, and the Alex Jones Show. So let's see how this plays out in real life. All Sides Technology is an American company that estimates the perceived political bias of content on online written news outlets. All sides surveyed its users in December 2024 to determine which media stories sparked the most media bias that election year. And you can see that the topics were all hot topics: abortion, immigration, LGBTQ issues, the Middle East, the economy, crime, hurricanes. Some of these topics often address cultural issues that link to people's inherent beliefs and stir up strong emotions. In the next slide, we'll see how all sides analyzed different ways media covered a story on vaccines last November in 2025.
Excuse me, Linda.
Yes.
We have a question, a clarifying question in the chat regarding the Advantis chart.
Okay.
The question is, are those based on the content of the stories, or do they include what stories are covered and not covered?
They're based on the content. The way Advantis does it is they review stories, individual stories, for credibility and bias. And then they come up with a average rating.
Thanks.
Sure. At least that's how they did it a few years ago. I took one in their classes. Okay, I have to get, okay, is this where I was? Okay.
Mhm.
So in November 2025, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, updated its website and reversed its position on vaccines and autism. It was a shift from previous guidance and has drawn criticism from the public health experts. The CDC website now says that the claim that vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim, because studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines cause autism. And then they have a footnote. Actually, they left the headline that says there is no link between vaccines and autism, but there's an asterisk, and it leads you to this statement that it's not evidence-based. So in the all sides analysis, you can see how various media framed the story when they changed the website. The right claimed that this is the Epoch Times. They claimed that the CDC says vaccines may cause autism, while the left from CNN Digital claimed that the CDC website was changed to include false claims that link autism and vaccines. And then from the center, the CDC website changed to contradict scientific conclusion that vaccines do not cause autism, and that's from News Nation. All Sides does the same analysis for current stories of the day, and there's their website down there on the screen. So where would you click? Headlines are often drafted as clickbait. That's how they're created. They want you to click. They want to pique your interest and make you click on the story. So which would you be more likely to click on? An affirming headline or a challenging headline? The research tells us that between 59 and 75% of shared articles are never actually opened or read. In other words, the majority of people form opinions or share content based solely on these headlines that are really created to pique your interest. So let's look at a recent example. These headlines and article content came from 3 sources on October 28th, 2025, the 28th day of the government shutdown. The Republicans and Democrats were wrangling over passing a continuing resolution to fund the government. With the government closed for 28 days, it became clear that without a resolution, the government would stop funding for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, on November 1st and cut assistance to millions of Americans. So let's look at 3 news sources and how they handled that news. The first is a newsletter from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Cutting off SNAP funds could mean 1 in 8 Americans go hungry. And then the article under the headline, covered the current data on SNAP to support the headline, who the program serves across the country, and a brief history of SNAP. Next up is Paul Krugman's October 28th Substack newsletter. Paul Krugman won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2008 for his work on international trade. He is widely recognized as a liberal economist and commentator. His newsletter headline on October 28th, "The Hunger Games Begin. 40 million Americans are about to lose food stamps." And then there's Fox News Digital News. Their headline was "Senate Democrats Block Republicans' Bid to End 28-Day Government Shutdown." This Fox News article emphasized the FAA air traffic controllers who had already missed a paycheck and reported in the closing sentences that the GOP House members were working on a one-off series of bills to back pay air traffic controllers, pay some federal workers, and provide some SNAP funds. So how can you know that a story is fair and balanced if you only read the headline? Where would you click? What about bias in other forms of media? What about news that is reported, discussed, and analyzed in podcasts, on social media, by late night pundits, or by influencers? There are thousands of influencers vying for your attention via podcasts, Substacks, YouTube videos, TikToks, and more. These media sources can provide specialized news reports and analysis presented by experts in areas such as law, public health, foreign policy, the economy, and politics. But just remember, like this sentence says up here, they want your attention, and you need to be discerning. It's your attention, and it's yours. Don't give it away to just anybody. So influencers wield a tremendous amount of power in modern day discourse. In 2024, surveys from the Better Business Bureau showed that 82.7% of U.S. marketers partnered with influencers in creative ad campaigns, and survey responses also showed that 71 to 74% of U.S. consumers trusted influencers to some degree, reflecting their growing role in shaping opinions. So digital influencers can be credible and provide important insights into policy discussions because they can discuss complex issues in layman's terms, excuse me, helping the public understand the implications of policy decisions. And they can take the time to message with details versus depending on headlines and sound bites, and they provide a position that's based on facts and data rather than emotions and outrage. So here are two podcasts to consider. At the top is Stay Tuned with Preet, a top-rated legal podcast that discusses law, politics, and current events with guests ranging from legal experts to journalists. Preet Bharara is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York and often breaks down complex issues like Supreme Court cases, political investigations, and global affairs. Preet positions himself as a defender of the rule of law, not as a partisan progressive. Bharara sticks to the letter of the law and cites legal precedents in grounding his review of court rulings, past and present. And then another example is Advisory Opinions. This is hosted by David French and Sarah Isker. This show reviews and discusses Supreme Court cases, constitutional law, and broader legal debates through a conservative lens. David French is a senior editor at The Dispatch and a former U.S. attorney specializing in constitutional law and religious liberty cases. And I think he also, he writes for The Dispatch and he writes for the New York Times. He has an opinion column. And Sarah Isker is a Harvard Law graduate, former DOJ spokesperson, and a political strategist. They promote conservative legal positions centered on constitutional originalism, judicial restraint, limits on federal power, and strong protections for free speech and religious liberty. These podcasts put forward very different legal positions, but that may not mean they're biased. Which podcast would you likely listen to? Are you choosing media based on confirmation bias, seeking to bolster deeply held biases and beliefs? Do you ever purposely seek out an opposing point of view? How do you determine if a podcaster is in fact credible? And consider further, if you listen to both of these podcasts, you might get a broader 180-degree view of legal positions. So if you're interested in following a podcaster, here are some things to look for. Proven expertise. Check their qualifications, professional experience, or their history of work in the niche they talk about. For example, a fitness influencer with certifications or a medical influencer with a healthcare background is more credible than someone without. Content quality. Consistent, well-researched, and informative posts show that they know their subject. Shallow and clickbait style content is a red flag. Reliable sources. Are they referencing credible sources? Do they share reliable facts and data that advance their position? Are they transparent? Credible influencers disclose partnerships and sponsored content. Hidden promotions or constant product pushing without disclosure should undermine your trust. And social proof. Mentions in reputable media, collaborations with respected brands, and endorsements from other experts strengthen credibility. Political podcasts exist to advance a political agenda. Adfontes has recently added political podcasts to their bias chart to show which lean left and right, or have more or less truthful reporting underlying their broadcasts. Bias exists in every media channel, from print to broadcast to all forms of digital media. Adfontes actually evaluates many of these forms of media. You can access their chart at their website. And All Sides does the same thing. They have bias charts and they have a website you can access. So break out of your news silo. Check the bias charts and ask yourself if you follow your media sources because they keep you well informed with complete and balanced information, or only because you feel comfortable and agree with what they report. Make a conscious effort to use from the most credible, least biased news sources available to you, and access a wide range of news sources to get a clearer and more accurate picture of what's being reported. Next, be wary of news reports that read or sound more like opinion pieces. With the 24-hour news cycle currently offered by cable and digital channels, a lot of time is spent commenting on the news versus reporting it. So on the media bias chart, if you go here and look, you want to stay within this green dotted box. And what I would recommend, this is just how I do it. If I read the New York Times, and I have found, and they're a bit to the left of the bias chart. So I go over to the right side of the center line is what I'm trying to say. They're a bit to the left of the center line, which you can't see it on here because there's so many things piled up on top of each other. But you can I found the Dispatch, and that's the one they mentioned with David French and Sarah Iskler. It's a little bit to the right, but I get their morning newsletter and they've got really good news reports. It's really informative and very fact-based. I really like it. Or there's ProPublica, the Globe and Mail, Wall Street Journal. Just stay within the green box, but try to sample one on the right side of the center line and one on the left side. But stay in the green box. This stuff down here in the corners isn't worth your attention. So next, check out the sources a media outlet regularly cites. If a news organization only uses sources or analysts that lean one way politically, it's a red flag for bias. And watch out for cherry picking. When media pick data to support a biased position and blur the facts behind the numbers. Here's an example. This graphic makes it seem like the vast majority of SNAP recipients are from foreign countries and not really quote unquote American. It's a dog whistle for sure. So, and you know, the first thing you ought to note on this little graphic is they don't spell Haitian correctly. Their grammar, somebody didn't proofread the little title box. Their immigrants have becoming very dependent on SNAP. And then look at the numbers. I mean, if they're implying that these are 100%, they're not 100%. So what it actually shows is the percentage of people from each of these ethnic groups who receive SNAP benefits. And these ethnic populations in the United States are relatively small. So, for example, looking at the Somalis, it's estimated that there are 300,000 Somalis who are immigrants in the United States, and 42.4% of those 300,000 or 127,200 receive SNAP benefits or food stamps. And so that's really only 0.31% of the total number of people who receive SNAP benefits. 89.4% of SNAP recipients are US-born citizens. So next, proactively seek out the other side of the story. Doing this will protect you from bias, deepen your understanding of the broader picture, strengthen your ability to make informed decisions, and help you better understand the motivations, fears, and values of others. And give government-run media outlets the side eye. As Otis noted in her book, in many countries such as China, Russia, Iran, and others, the government either runs, sponsors, or plays a large role in directing what gets reported and how it's presented. Their quote-unquote news channels become nothing more than propaganda designed to advance their agendas. When government takes control of media, it's a recipe for the spread of fake news. And with the consolidation of media in America, where large corporations control a majority of media outlets, this is watching as well, especially as corporations are becoming more and more politicized and can benefit from advancing key policy objectives. Finally, watch out for loaded terms. We have all witnessed the decline of civility in modern-day discourse and the rise of rude name-calling, a worrisome trend in America. Here's a clear example. Okay.
Yesterday, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called out Democrats for their unwavering allegiance to this new radical wing of the Democratic Party. Take a look.
The Democrat Party's main constituency are made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. That is who the Democrat Party is catering to, not the Trump administration and not the White House and not the Republican Party, who is standing up for law-abiding Americans, not just across the country, but around the world.
Now, these comments prompted this unhinged meltdown from the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Take a look.
We got Caroline Leavitt, she's out of control. And I'm not sure whether she's just demented, ignorant, a cold liar, or all of the above. But the notion that An official White House spokesperson would say that the Democratic Party consists of terrorists, violent criminals, and undocumented. This makes no sense. That this is what the American people are getting from the Trump administration in the middle of a shutdown.
So, does this exchange give you confidence in either party? Are any of these remarks statesmanlike? Does any of this advance a policy agenda?
Linda,
Huh?
there's a question in chat related to the topic you're sharing at this time, and that is, does the government-controlled media include Truth Social?
Well, that, well, I don't think that, I think in the true sense of the word, I don't think Truth Social is a government product. It's Trump's, isn't it like a private, his own private little thing? But he is president, you're right. I don't know how to answer that question, really. Does anybody else have a comment on that? Nope. Okay, well, we'll get back to that later if I can. I just don't think that's a government entity, but so it gets confusing, doesn't it? So now what? Before you feel your blood pressure climb or lose sleep over a headline or a story, think about taking a news break. This includes all the means through which you get your news, from TV networks to Facebook to podcasts to the Denver Post to the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal. Put away your digital devices and spend time in relationships with people, with your family, your friends, your neighbors. Find ways to remind yourselves what we have in common versus constantly consuming media that is tearing us apart. And then when you're ready, seek out centrist media and leave the outrage channels behind. So like on that media bias chart, stay in that green box. Don't go to the extremes or far down on that chart. So key takeaways from today. I'm biased, you're biased, we're all biased. It's important to understand how our biases color our perceptions of people and events. Media can be biased as well, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Media sources can color the news to present a position versus presenting only facts. It's important to recognize media bias and to know when we're being manipulated. Digital media can use our biases to dish up content that reinforces our biases and beliefs versus offering any opposing viewpoints. But not all media is biased. Credible media can provide facts and data that challenge our assumptions if we're ready to listen. And it's really important that you don't just give up on media, because we need to be informed. A democracy is based on an informed citizenry and participation of those citizens in government. If we lose information, if we stop, then we're no longer a democracy. So what you need to do, and you should do, is to choose to be a responsible consumer of news. So thank you for coming tonight. Don't miss next week, our third session, when we'll take a look at propaganda and polarization, surviving the avalanche of fake news. You're invited to read chapters 17 and 18 in True False as background for this topic. And I just want to remind everybody that we do in Larimer County have a news literacy page. It's full of tips and references for navigating today's information ecosystem. And there's also a resource, Let's Talk About Digital Threats to Democracy. It's a project of the League of Women Voters of Maine, Alaska, and Colorado. You can find that on the Maine website, the League of Women Voters of Maine. And it's a series of webinars that offer a wealth of information. Okay.
So Linda, Dan, there are a couple more comments based on the question about the government-controlled media, including Truth Social. And the one comment is that government policy is announced on it. And also another comment that says the president represents the government. So the thinking is we could conclude that anything that is put out on Truth Social is a governmental statement.
Yeah.
So that's one of our audience members. Here's another one. Truth Social was founded by DJT, while not technically a government entity. I need some help with what these initials stand for. DJT.
Donald J. Trump.
Donald John Trump.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Entity does use it as a tool for global and domestic policy. One can observe that when one compares Truth Social content to that provided by Reuters or NPR. Jazz, do you want to pick up any additional comments following?
Sure. Yeah. Somebody CL said thank you, and then Kathy Wilson said interesting information to think deeply about. Websites you provide are good ones to explore, and she said thank you. And
Okay, so I
that's
think
it.
that covers the chat room.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
I'm just wondering, does anybody want to come off mic and ask a question? You're welcome to do that.
Yeah, or make a comment.
May I make a comment? This is Jill O. I'm the one who wrote the thing about Truth Social.
Yes.
My observation has been that nearly every news outlet has become increasingly not necessarily using an algorithm, but using whether it's the tone of their language or background music at the beginning of a news show to kind of, focus in on breaking news. They all seem to be competing for your attention. But I also stop and think about that. I believe that the America has been formed on capitalism, and each one of these agencies are using it to gain financial advantage. Even the influencers, I believe, did that. I think that started during the pandemic when people were trying to find a way to earn income when they couldn't work. So I believe it's a very complicated question.
Anybody else? Beth.
Yeah, just a thought. I think, I agree that there's bias on both sides, left and right. And I totally think it's great. In fact, thank you for the suggestions for looking at the bias charts again. I've seen them, but I see they've been updated, and of course, considering the podcast and all those other things too. So I think that's a great thing for all of us to do. The only danger I feel like is this whole both sidism kind of thing where both sides are guilty of this, and so the truth lies somewhere in the middle, right? So I just have a feeling that we have to be careful though, because not just the bias, but I'm even thinking these days about truth, there's misinformation and there's disinformation, and this whole idea of different sets of facts, I think we have to push back against. So I don't know. So, I guess I don't know if I'm being clear on this, but I feel like we have to be careful too, not to just equate bias with lies. So there's going to be right out lies. And I agree it occurs on both sides, but and I guess I'm being biased in saying this, but I feel like there's a lot of lying going on to the right now. So I don't know where the middle lies on all this, but I think we all need to be careful and definitely seek out other sources than we're used to. I agree with all that, but I just hope we also really make a clear definition between what's an outright lie and what is actually the truth.
Mhm. Yeah, and I agree. I don't look at all sides terribly much, and it's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I don't want to read a headline that's on the right or the left. I want to read the truth. And so I'm confused as to why I need to know that. But it's also, you need to know how people are thinking who don't share your opinions, who see things
Mhm.
on the other side. So it's useful that way. I
Right.
think.
I think it's good for understanding the other side. I just think we have to be careful not to kind of draw a middle line and think that that means that both sides are equally correct on everything.
Right.
Hmm.
Kathy.
I think one thing we all need to be is a critical thinker when we consume any kind of media, any kind of article, as we listen to podcasts. It's important to listen to the vocabulary that's used. It can be subtle, but if the vocabulary that's used raises emotions, then I'd be really careful about what their message is. Um, yeah, vocabulary is incredibly important.
Right. And the one thing that bothers me when you read or you watch it on TV is everything is breaking news.
Yeah.
It's always got breaking news. And I'm going, no, I read that yesterday. It's not breaking news. And it can be really misleading, when you see a breaking news that 3 more service members were killed. Well, I thought that was new, and it wasn't. It was from 2 days ago.
Right.
Any number is awful, but it's just really misleading to do that.
Mhm.
So,
Well, they're just trying to get your attention. If
mhm,
they can get your attention, then they've
right.
scored.
Yeah, and there was a really good article in the Atlantic by Jonathan Haidt. Is that how you say his name, the sociologist?
Yeah.
And he wrote about don't give all these things your attention. This is
Yes.
you're talking, and this is my pet peeve. But when I go for a walk in the beautiful sunshine and I encounter a mother strolling her baby and she's got earbuds in,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, just take them out for 5 minutes while you go and out in the sunshine and listen to the birds, listen to the traffic, but take the earbud. Anyway, so that's my my bias, my rant for the night. Kathy, did you raise your hand?
Nope.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, this has been interesting. I've learned from you guys, just like I hope you've learned from the slideshow. So,
Very good.
and I hope I'll see you next week. Same time on Tuesday.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.